We're going to talk about blockchain technology today, amongst other things. Maybe before we dive in, if you want to give me sort of the non-technical elevator pitch for why you feel blockchain technology is going to be so transformative, what it is, and how it stands apart from sort of the cryptocurrencies that we hear so much about.
Yeah, great question. So most people, when they think about blockchain, they think about cryptocurrency, things like Bitcoin and Ethereum as an example. What cryptocurrency does with blockchain is that they basically create a coin or a token that represents an asset, and they're following this coin through a series of wallets. That's why it lends itself well to these sort of, chain of custody, who owned it, where did it go kind of solution. But for us, we're really treating blockchain as an encryption technology, where a parent block of data is connected immutably to a child block of data. It cannot be deleted. It cannot be edited. It can only be appended, like DNA is passed from parent to child. And that's what's really exciting to me about blockchain, is that it's encryption at a very granular data level, and the ability to lend itself well to peer-to-peer technologies, meaning where different instances of the data at different distributed node places are equivalent and the same, so that it gives you a lot of flexibility and things that you can do with it. And that's where I'm most excited, because I think the potential for blockchain is untapped for specifically in managing distributed data, and what we hope eventually will be decentralized data. And that's what I find super exciting, and why it's different from the cryptocurrency models, which is just one implementation of blockchain.
Awesome. And then maybe before we dive into sort of specifics around the data aspect, I'd like to hear just a bit of a broader perspective from you. I know both of us come from the technology side and are sort of technologists by background. I think in our day-to-day lives, we get to interact with everyone across the healthcare sector, from administrators to really sort of frontline healthcare heroes. Just wondering from you, how you see your role as a technologist and sort of leading and evangelizing digital transformation, and how do we sort of balance the perspective that you and I bring to the table, not having that sort of lived experience.
Yes, it's a really good question. So for me, I'm probably an unusual technologist, in the sense that as a technologist, I tend to be technology agnostic. What I mean by that is that where we really should focus is what are we doing, to solve a problem. And so I like to focus on what the needs are for the people that we're trying to help, to actually do something with technology, not technology for technology's sake. That's where I kind of come from, So my role as a technologist is really to provide solutions to problems, and how we measure those problems and how we look at the impact and the importance of the problem is that, is what does it do? What is the benefit of it? And the benefits can revolve around, improving outcomes. It can revolve around increasing revenue streams. It can revolve around saving costs. It can revolve around, security and compliance, and making sure that, we treat things the way that they should be treated, rightfully so. And that's really my perspective as a technologist, is that my background as a technologist is simply tools that I bring to bear for a different perspective in terms of how we might be able to treat a problem. Because when you talk to people that actually live it, own the problem, what I like to do is have a conversation to understand what exactly it is that they're trying to figure out, and what is it they're trying to answer. And then we bring the technologies to play in terms of how it can have a role. It doesn't stand alone. It's something that I feel like is a broader aspect. So when we look at technology, I like to look at it in the context of a broader, what I call a system, and you can even call it an ecosystem, because that includes, not just the hardware and the software from a technology standpoint, but also the process, the people, and more importantly, now the data.
And that lends itself well to my next question. I've had the opportunity to hear you speak a few times, and we've had a number of conversations together. I know that sort of a central ethos for you is that as a healthcare system and as the technology providers that power it, we need to kind of move beyond beyond that concept of just being a series of systems and really move towards the data. So maybe take me through what that ethos means to you.
Yes. So let's give a real world example, right? When somebody breaks their hand, the nature of healthcare, particularly in the US, is that it takes a village to help you when you have a broken hand. When you go to emergency, for example, the emergency room has taken x-rays of your information. And then when you get admitted to the hospital, and let's say you need surgery, if the surgeon doesn't have access to that data, then you have to redo that surgery x-ray again. And then when you go back to your primary doctor for, your treatment and follow-up, they need the same information. They need information about what happened to your hand. When they start asking you to go to rehab that is outsourced, that's another piece of component of information. And so that's where, in healthcare, people buy pinpoint solutions, operational systems that do a very specific thing. EMRs, are meant to do a very specific thing. They for the most part are replacing what, doctors used to take as notes and so forth. But every person has multiple systems associated with their data, the imaging, their test information set, their rehab notes, things that they're self-assessing. And now with every system and device online, your wearables, the biometric information that you collect. This is what I mean about all the data that is necessary to treat you as an individual at this moment in time when you have a crisis or a critical moment. And that data comes from lots of different places and lots of different shapes and sizes. It's the nature of healthcare. Data from healthcare always has and always will come from many, many places. Even in an integrated health system, we're talking to one large company right now because they grew through acquisition. They literally have 92 different electronic medical record systems. That's wow, right? And really what you want to do is make that look like one so that you can have the best care possible. We already know that when you integrate data like that and people have the data about you that they need when they're treating you, that it improves the outcomes and it lowers the cost because now you don't have to have these redundant appointments and redundant tests right off the bat. I think back about a story that one of the folks shared with me. It's part of someone that's been helping us with our copy, for example. Her mom had to be taken, every week for treatment from a facility, and she literally is clutching paper to her chest when she is brought by the ambulance, to the facility for her recurring treatment. We can do better than that. That's what I mean about systems being data-centric. It's fine that they come from lots of different places, but we have to move away from, a system that requires data to be in a very specific format for a very specific purpose, and look about data that spans all of those things, because that's the body of data that's necessary when you're at your life's critical moment.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of what you touched on there is super core to the work that we do here at Thrive and drives a lot of the inspiration we have for our product too. From a what does this look like perspective. So I think a lot of the people on this call today are people that work in healthcare innovation, and we all know getting to that point of the project where everyone's along the lines of these are all great ideas, but integration or interoperability is going to stop us from moving forward because we need to cross these chasms that are quote unquote unsolvable or require expensive spin-off projects to make happen. How does the technology that emTRUTH is building and what you're a proponent of here we're talking about today, give me the actual, what does that look like and what does that change in the equation?
Yes, it's a great question because like you, right? We've done a bajillion and one data warehouse projects. Data warehouse projects are only structured data and they want to own the world. And that, not just their data, but all their collaborative partners' data, which results in these massive things that try to be all things to all people. And they're expensive, super expensive, not just to build, but also to maintain. And the majority of that data is unused. So that's, the current model. Where we're different from that is that we embrace that data comes from lots of different places. And so what we try to do is that we take the data from these source systems and we transform them into these much lower building blocks that are secured in blockchain. I like to think of them as Lego blocks, but if for people that have seen that movie, Big Hero 6, where all the little nanobots combine as you need to form the tool that you need, that's our vision for data. Data should combine in a form to use for the purpose that you have in mind. I truly believe that data should be purpose-driven. And what I mean by that is that once the data is transformed into these lower level building blocks like these Lego blocks, now you can combine them and reuse them in different ways and securely share them, because it's about sharing the right data with the right people at the right time, right? And it's all context dependent. And so being able to do that, without IT intervention, then makes the mechanics of interoperability easy and integration easy, and allows people to think about the more important question, which is data governance. How should the data be used? Who should it be shared with? From a strategic standpoint as an organization, what is our approach to how we govern this data? And once we establish that approach, how do we trickle down into the tactical ways for these individual systems to react in terms of how they treat that data to support that data governance policy, so that it's thoughtful about how you're sharing data as opposed to all or nothing, and for healthcare in particular, because the data is confidential and secure. That's another thing that we're totally different from crypto. Crypto is completely anonymous. We don't know who it is, and it's completely public. And what we think about it is that when we think about data, it should support the entire spectrum of access. Blockchain Bitcoin is on Bitcoin cryptocurrency is like on one extreme end where everybody can see everything and nobody knows who you are. For healthcare data and in a really highly regulated industry, there is another extreme where it says some data is extremely confidential and only a few people should see it. We need to support that entire spectrum because it depends on the context. When you're a candidate in a clinical trial, for example, that data is anonymized and they should only see the anonymized data. When you're working with your healthcare provider, your primary care provider, they need to know who you are and you need to know who they are. And so that information is shared and is known. That's what I mean about context, and we need to support that entire spectrum. And that's our vision. So it's not just converting the data into these blockchains that can be reused for different purposes now, because we can convert them out at the same time. That's what we mean about being standards agnostic. When I was on technical committees to create standards, we would just joke, right? The nice thing about standards is that there's so many to choose from. And so that's the whole point, right? People want to use what they want to use. So let them use what they want to use. And we can comply with that data to make it the way that they need to use it for that system. That's what I mean about being purposeful. And being able to aggregate and combine data on demand. And that's some of the things that we bring to bear that we're different. We're one of the few companies that is actually advancing blockchain for distributed data management, distributed for the moment, but ultimately we want it to be decentralized, meaning that it can autonomously do things that are well vetted. We're not at that phase yet, not because of the technology, because all that technology is our pieces of code. It's really more about having the infrastructure and the thought process behind it to make sure that it's legal, that it's private, that it follows policy as far as data governance is concerned, that it follows regulatory requirements, all of those things. That's the harder part, of true decentralization. And so we take steps in terms of how to get there, and being able to even combine data in a secure way from multi-sources right off the bat, that's a huge cost savings. And people then can focus on actually doing something useful with that data. And the way that we do it in terms of our approach, we talked about it before, we won't dig into the technical details, Alec, right? But we can do it in days, not months. And that's what we want to enable. We want to make easy, just like you want to make easy the front end, for creating workflows and for what the UI looks like. We want to make it easy for data integration and interoperation. Take that off the table so that you can actually do something with the data, because that's the most important thing.
Yeah. So, take me back to the example of I think the very touching example of the person coming into the hospital, sort of clutching their paper,
Yeah.
Which is something that we talk a lot about too. And I think, we obviously make a product where we want to take that paper and transform it into something much more usable for the person.
Yeah.
But talk to me about how the model we're talking about of interoperability today plays into that. And we talk a lot at Thrive about the patient kind of being the walking health record. So the concept that the patient owns their data. This is data about you. You should have full rights to it, and that's been supported legislatively across Canada and across North America.
Okay, so 2 points. Let's first talk about data ownership, and then we'll talk about
Sure.
the mechanics of how that might actually work in an application. So first point, we completely agree on that point, right? Which is that people should own and control their own data. That's what we do. That's what we design to. That's what we build to. We don't monetize people's data. We don't aggregate other people's data. And that's why a lot of healthcare organizations are hesitant to send information to third parties, right? Because they're afraid that they're going to use that data in unplanned and unauthorized ways. We don't do that. Everything's encrypted in transit and at rest because we want you to control and own your data. Everything that we do, in fact, is blockchain, including the log. Who has access, who's touched it, who shared it, what's been done to that data. And that's something also different about us. And we do it at enterprise, scale, speed, so that it's thousands of transactions per second, not, less than 10, like many of these Bitcoin kinds of transactions are. So that's what we need at enterprise level. And that's about the data ownership, right? So when a patient owns their own data, they can grant custodial rights to their primary care provider, who has the knowledge and expertise to be able to update their medical records and share them with people on their behalf. If the person decides to choose providers, they can easily, without IT intervention, rescind that grant, because we can even blockchain consent, to the data itself, the actual data set. And they can grant it to a new provider. I think that's the idea of where we want to be and where we want to get to in terms of people being their own, being their own walking medical record. It's data about them. They should know what it is, and they should be able to control who gets access to it. So even our, we build pinpoint solutions to show the power of what we can do. We use our APIs, like we like to say, we drink our own champagne. One of the apps that we created was for proof of vaccination, which is highly controversial in a lot of different places. But for us, our model is different because even though the employer might pay for the system, the patient or the employee owns the data. They get to choose whether they want to share that proof of vaccination with that employer. And so that's a typical example in terms of the power of people owning and controlling their own data, so that people have a decision, about a thoughtful and mindful decision about what they want to do with that data.
In one of your previous answers, responses, you touched on standards, and I think anyone who's been around healthcare for long enough has heard of FHIR and HL7, and it was sort of pitched as the promised land of integration, because all of a sudden we could put data in the same language. And I think the analogy that I often use is, okay, sure, you can have people speak the same language, but if they're standing on the opposite sides of the country, no matter how loud you yell in that same language, you can't hear each other. Talk to me and maybe describe how the model that emTRUTH empowers and that blockchain empowers solves that sort of problem of being able to speak to each other.
Yes. So remember I talked about how we transform data from source systems into lower level of higher, more granular, higher detailed blockchain.
Yeah.
We can combine those and then build a connector out that follows these standards that people want to use. So this is what I mean about, converting and morphing that data into something that is useful for consumption, like FHIR is a standard. We love standards, but again, standards have limitations. Some of them are technical because FHIR, as an example, relies on SSL as a delivery for their security. We actually bring it all the way, for us, security is holistic, all the way down to individual data block levels where, the key to block a child and parent data is different. The lock is different, so that we have better security around that. And for, some things, FHIR has their own data model, for example, for electronic medical record, but not all things fall under that. And so, you want to be able to support FHIR, but you also want to support other things as well. Unstructured information as an example, wearables, as an example, things that are outside the scope of what that is, and still be able to aggregate that information together. So we transform the data with a connector to FHIR, and now people can freely use and connect. It only takes us time to build that one. You own that connector, and you can share it freely if you want. And the thing about FHIR, right, is that I go back to, there's so many to choose from. FHIR is being pushed aggressively, and we like FHIR, right? But there's also OMA that has been in existence for a long time. There's also existing EMR systems that they've already put a chunk of money and resources into building, that have their own data models that are not FHIR compliant, that don't exactly mapped to FHIR, as a standard. And this is where we feel that being agnostic about the standards is useful. Use what you want. We will help you, take advantage of the standards that you have and that you want to use. You can, in fact, take the EMR data coming into the blockchain and convert it out into FHIR so that you can be compliant, when, I think it's a question of when, not a question of if, when agencies start, like CMS, for example, start to mandate that information that's shared with them is through a specific standard like FHIR. And so that's ways to do it, in a low cost, low risk to the organization. Because I think, it's sort of like how we started, back in the olden days in the internet. Do you remember that from long ago? Everybody tried to own the world in terms of going to one monolithic system of using one email system.
Yeah.
That didn't work. Nobody wants to do that. And now, you just, as long as you follow a standard, the one that you want, and kids get to the standard, it's closer to that reality. That's wider use things. So imagine now, hospitals that are very tight in terms of budget and IT resources. It's a big lift for them to, make existing systems FHIR compliant. With emTRUTH and with Thrive, we can do it easier and faster for them and not change their operational process.
Yeah. That leads perfectly into where I want to go next. Just, I cannot imagine what it must be like to be a hospital CIO these days. We all read the headlines in terms of, the the health tech sector and how much innovation is going to take place. And there are, just so many companies focused on transforming healthcare in one way or the other. And I think CIOs are just being inundated with this noise. I think something that both Thrive and emTRUTH hold core to us is making sure that we can fit into that enterprise IT model, and that we're not just another health tech startup that has grandiose ideas, but when you actually try to apply them, really struggle to fit that model. So how does what you're describing here today and what emTRUTH does sort of really fit into that enterprise compliance space?
Yes. So first of all, we want to make it easy on the CIOs. They really have a lot on their plate. For some, especially when technology is not strategic and it's more a cost center, it's very difficult for them to introduce innovation. And so there's twofold to that. One is that we make the IT lift super easy, meaning that because the data is encrypted and the data is theirs to own, and we're creating the blockchain in their name, like domain names are registered to someone else. We don't actually own the blockchains. We create it on their behalf and we manage on their behalf. They can simply just send us, sample information of what their data source looks like. We can create the connector for them and turn on that stream in a QA environment as part of user acceptance testing. We don't actually have to see the data, so that, they're also, again, protecting the compliance nature of it. And it requires very little IT lift in terms of their part of resources, very tight and precious resources in the IT department to get that into an organization and test it and vet it. So that's one. It's the mechanics of doing that. The other point, is that I like to be practical. I think this you can relate because you've been a consultant for a long time too. A lot of people ask me to do projects over and over again, mainly with introducing new technologies into operations, oftentimes enterprise-wide, that touched everybody. And so what I like to do is I like to take a measured approach. I like to start off with a narrowly defined pilot that it's easy to accomplish. It has an ROI based on something that the customer cares about, that the organization cares about. And then you can actually see it in play, see what it does, see how you're going to do it. And then we also have a better understanding of what their needs are. And then based on that, one of the deliverables from that pilot is actually a roadmap, which I've done very successfully for Fortune 500 companies, is a roadmap of how to expand safely and systematically. So that there's a plan. It's simply a suggestion, obviously it's up to them, but it's something that, it works. It's a process that works, it's a structured way, it's systematic, because it's all about minimizing risk and maximizing benefit, right? And one of the things that CIOs should certainly be worried about is compliance, because the data, is that you hear about it. For us, compromising data is a huge liability. Having patient data compromised or used without proper consent is a huge liability. One is that, the systems operationally, if they're down, that's huge operational time if you're hacked, as an example. The other one is really, the liability when data that should be private and there's an expectation that you're protecting it is compromised. And that kind of damage is immeasurable.
So, I mean, if we just distill down to try to come up with three sort of key benefits, key proponents to kind of what we're talking about. I mean, I think it's being able to move data from point A to point B faster than ever before, with incredible, not faster from an actual transmission perspective, but from the setup
time to market kind of perspective, right?
Yeah, and then how to make sure people have control over that data in terms of who can access it and what's been done to it and how it's been touched and who's looked at it, and having that move with the data.
Yeah.
Those are the two that jump to mind for me. What's sort of maybe the third and fourth from your perspective that you'd add to that list?
I like to think of it from a slightly different way, which is that healthcare in the United States is still fee for service and is still a business, right? So from a business perspective, what we try to do with our solution is really three benefit statements. We make them money, for example, if they improve their star rating, that is a lift in revenue because the customer experience or the patient experience is improved and the outcomes are improved. And CMS, is happy, and insurance is happy. It makes them money. It saves them money because you can reduce the number of redundant tests and redundant appointments by sharing medical records. And it stops people from being fired or being sued, right? Because the data has been compromised and, you didn't do, your part in doing best practices. I mean, security is something that we, think about deeply because it's holistic and it's ever evolving, right? There is no perfect solution. Because the threats are always evolving. And so we try to think about it, in those terms. And so as healthcare as a business, when we think about the benefits of what we do as a company and what we bring to them, is, like I said, encapsulated in those three benefit statements. We make them money, we save them money, we make sure that they don't get fired.
It's good wins all around.
All around, right?
In terms of I think one thing that sort of aligns emTRUTH and Thrive Health in lots of ways is that we're both platform companies. We both, we're not making a specific solution, but there are lots of companies out there that have chosen, one very specific area of focus, one disease, or, one sub-condition within a disease, and are really focused on making a huge impactful difference to those patients with technology. And I think both things are really important in an ecosystem. We've all lived through the days of, monolithic IT systems that were meant to be one thing to all people. How do you see the importance of platform companies like us in terms of empowering that ecosystem that sits beyond us, and not trying to own that ecosystem and say, we have a marketplace, come build in our marketplace, but really truly empower it?
Yes. So we're an API first company because we believe in that model. And already we've been talking about it, and like we talk with other companies. I truly believe this is part of our value system. I believe that we're stronger together. We're not trying to be all things to all people or own the world. We're trying to do what we do very well. And we want to be emTRUTH Inside for them so that they don't have to worry about, the data component of that. Let them focus on the things that's really high value, where they're actually doing something with the data. So we actually like to partner with companies like yours. We like to partner with companies that are doing machine learning, for example, because, we chatted briefly about that, right? With your low-code, no-code front end, with our data platform, and then now with us being able to feed that data stream to these machine learning companies that, for example, are trying to be predictive in somebody that might be have a propensity for disease, right? They need to consume that data in a very specific way. So we not only are able to provide data provenance, data traceability, because that's super important now. The big, the whole different topic, which is how do we make sure that these AI models are dependable, right? And data traceability, using emTRUTH and blockchain is a way to show, what was used, what was done to it, how did you arrive at these decisions? And now you've got something that actually does something with the data, something useful from an outcome perspective. And all of that is super valuable. I mean, as a foundational technology, we are applicable to a lot of different industries, Alec. That's why we were chosen to be the distributed data platform on the NASA project. And that's great. But as a company, we love those projects. But we've decided to focus most of our attention in healthcare, all our attention on healthcare, because the impact that we can make in terms of the societal impact is super important to us. And that's where we really, like you, I could have probably been a consultant forever. And I enjoyed that job, and I enjoyed that career, but I want to be passionate about what I do. I want to make a difference, and that's the whole reason we started emTRUTH. And that's important to me. And I feel like we could really do something super useful and move the needle for healthcare. I look at these studies that people, these large big threes put out about the cost inflators. If we don't actually do something and treat data the way that it needs, because data is at the heart of our digital universe now, including healthcare. Nothing showed that, more so than this pandemic, the need for it. And there's a huge amount of not just advancement, but sadly catch up that needs to be done compared to other industries. And I think we could really move the needle. I'm going to get off my soapbox now, but
no. I think it's the right things to be thinking about, and it's I think what makes working in this industry so rewarding for the just a little bit of that.
Yes, exactly. I mean, for as a business, we want it to be a successful business, but for us, it's not just about the money. For us, we want to do something that's impactful. Yeah. We want to do something that makes a difference. And I believe this will, because again, it's a different way to look at data that's more natural to data.
Yeah, for sure. I have one more question for you from my side, and then we'll start rolling in there's lots of great questions coming in the Q&A, okay. So we'll start rolling some of those. And I guess last question for me is one thing that's core with us at Thrive is sort of the connection we have into the great research universities that we have here in Canada, as well as throughout North America. And how do you envision the technology that you're creating being able to assist in that de-identification process to allow research to happen on really important data sets that's very hard to compile based on the present landscape?
Well, I love that. In fact, a lot of our work, especially with grants and proposals, I love to pull universities in. For a variety of reasons. One is a little shout out to our friends at Johns Hopkins with their demand planning model that we could, again, do something with the data for PPE demand predictions and skilled nursing capabilities prediction. And then also the pilot that we did with the Mayo Clinic and the Society of Critical Care Medicine. So they had a global COVID registry, where they were looking at the treatments for COVID in intensive care, right? The sickest patients. And that information now can be sliced and diced and combined, again, with consent, because, we can blockchain the IRB board approval to use data, that specific piece of data for a very specific purpose. It can be used for other clinical research. That's the reason why Roche, selected us out of so many different companies to be part of Plug and Play Germany's CRACER program, is that they want to be able to take all this multimodal data, your clinical assessments, patient assessments, doctor assessments, the wearables and so forth from a clinical trial, and being able to recombine that information in different ways for other clinical studies. And that's super important because when we start looking at ways to look at new drug discoveries, to look at different ways to make clinical trials more inclusive and more, more accessible and cheaper and faster, those ultimately all benefit people, right? I think about a company, a hospital I was talking to, they would love to have more of their patients that are much more representative of the population be a potential clinical trial candidate. But they literally walk around with binders with pieces of paper of people that are candidates, and the same people over and over again. And really, when you're looking at some of these new clinical trials that are coming up, you want to be able to look at the data and to be able to pinpoint more inclusive demographics, so that it includes everybody. That's the problem with some of the machine learning, right? It's not with the algorithms and the models. Those are very well understood. It's the training data. If the training data is biased, the results will be biased. That's why Google worked on it, right? Because for a long time, their recognition algorithms didn't do well on people of color. It depends on the training data. And that's why we say that data is at the heart of some of these new innovations coming out.
Yeah, so I think that's a great place to land there.
Yeah.
Going to the Q&A.
We'll start with the questions that have come in and then let others flow from those questions. So starting with the one about kind of the mood or kind of the reception you're seeing from healthcare providers and institutions. The question is, do you feel many healthcare providers and institutions still hold skepticism towards blockchain's application in healthcare, or is the mood changing?
I think it depends on the healthcare system. Because if there are some that have truly embraced, the new ways of doing things, because I think the pandemic has really highlighted the need, right? So it depends on the institution. So some organizations, have innovation and they recognize that data is going to be strategic for them. It basically comes down to that question, and it's even the same with other industries that I've consulted to. Do you feel that technology and data is strategic? If the answer is yes, then there is room to help those organizations. And you have to be honest in that answer. You don't want to say it just because it's a good marketing thing, but that you've actually dedicated resources to being able to do that. And if the answer to that is yes, particularly around data, then blockchain can be, and part of it is an educational process, and why I love these kinds of webinars, with platforms like yours, is that people still think about blockchain as being Bitcoin. It is not. We use blockchain as an encryption technology, and just having people understand that basic fact, makes a huge difference in terms of adopting that kind of solution, because it's been around for long enough and been proving enough. And we take a very measured stance in terms of the ways that we implement, blockchain. In fact, we can have another, entire seminar about smart contracts. But again, we want to be very thoughtful about how that is. So that's the way I think about it. And I think it depends on the organization. If the organization treats data and systems as strategic, then yes, they will be open to listening to blockchain as a solution.
I want to come back to some of the blockchain questions. I think there's a lot to dig into there. There's a really great question just about your personal experience. I think we should take a break and dive into. But just how did your experience at NASA inform your work in healthcare? Were there any lessons learned that are applicable across these industries?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is yes, right? We are all a sum of our experiences. And the one thing that I really learned from JPL is that I had a lot of intellectual freedom there, which I really appreciated. And we were solving hard problems, and which is what healthcare is. It's a hard problem. Where it informs us is, ultimately it's about the data. And the reason why there's a big connect, even why NASA still chose us as a platform, because if you think about it, building a spacecraft has the same kinds of needs that healthcare does. It takes a giant team of people from lots of different organizations that own different parts of the problem and the data, and they work from different geographies. You're looking at different kinds of data, very rich data set. In healthcare and in spacecraft, you have images, you have doctor's notes, you have surgery videos, and being able to capture that information and to relate them in a way to share it with the right people at the right time. It's, you want it to be confidential and secure, in terms of that. Those are things that I think inform the experience. Being able to take an engineering approach to solving hard problems. So the first thing I like to do, that's part of what this roadmap is really about when we talk about a systemic and risk managed deployment for healthcare providers that want to start with a pilot and then ultimately get to where they want to be. It's about creating a plan that is executable, that gets you from point A to point B and minimizing your risk. It's about risk management.
Yeah. Going back to the patient angle, we have a question around what's the best way to educate the patient as to how this technology works and the benefits to them. And I'll add my own little extra spin to that, which is I think a big part of what we built here at Thrive is user experience to put data into the hands of patients and have them understand it. to what degree do you, I mean, so first of all, let's make sure we answer the user's question here. And then my follow-up question to that is, to what degree do you feel that patients should be sort of exposed to that underlying technology, and then what benefit does it have to them?
Yeah, for me, I think most patients, it's like buying a car. Most people won't care about how the engine works. They just want to be able to know that it was reliable, it gets them here, it meets a certain criteria for them. Some people really dig in and want to understand how the engine works. They want to be able to do their maintenance. And I think patients will follow along that same spectrum. It depends on the patient and what they want to learn. The most important thing, though, is building trust in the process and trust in the data. And I think that's the component, that we want to make sure is front and center. And a lot of it is, to your point, Alec, is that the user experience. All the what I call the humma-hummas that people have to sign, even like with e-consent right now, signing a form in a digital format, while useful, is not the end goal. The end goal is being able to easily, in simple, plain language, explain very crisply what exactly you're signing and who exactly, will have access to your data and for what purpose. I think that's the more important thing, right? If people want to delve into the technology underneath it, more power to them. But I think the most important thing is making it simple for them to use and for them to understand and have faith and trust the data, trust the process.
Yeah, great. And I think the other benefit to that too is that as we look at things like GDPR and these sort of privacy frameworks that are emerging that all of us obviously have to comply with, I think a lot of the principles in those around ensuring people understand their data can actually be solved very easily by technology along the lines of what you're talking about, and that prepares us for that reality.
Yeah.
We have a great question here. I'm going to actually just read it word for word to make sure I capture it properly, but would love to hear a bit about how to take a data-centric approach that embraces interoperability for systems that have large swaths of patients and infrastructure in areas with limited connectivity, for example, rural and remote, or areas that are just lagging in general with regards to adoption of technology.
Yeah, okay. So that's a multifaceted question, right? So first of all, when you have limited connectivity, that is an issue, because the whole idea for when I was at JPL, in fact, one of the initiatives that I really was interested in was talking about this generation of technology haves and have-nots, and underlying it all is infrastructure. To me, I believe that bandwidth is an infrastructure problem that could be solved. And is being solved. So I'm going to put that aside because that has to be a prerequisite. But that having been said, there is still limited connectivity. And I think this is where some of our aerospace experience comes to bear. The nice thing about blockchain and our technology and what we're architecting, right, is that there are certain aspects that we haven't actually implemented. Just so you know, there's something, a design that we did for a white paper that somebody asked us to do, is to be able to have some autonomy to work on its own within its own context, given that kind of localized connectivity. And then when you get back to the connectivity component, when you can actually come back online, the ability to sync that information in such a way that maintains its integrity in terms of blockchain, right? Making sure that it's part of the official record, the trusted copy, that can be shared and used in a distributed way. So I think that's the infrastructure discussion. We could have a whole conversation about ways that we could make it more autonomous in terms of some autonomy there, and that's stuff that we have in our roadmap in terms of what we see in the vision. I started off with the vision of what we see as data, right? Data itself should be able to make simple decisions. We're not there yet, but that's where we want to be. Until we get there, the ability to share data and to be able to integrate that data, I think will get us a long way to that. Just like having connectivity will get us a long way to that. There'll still be pockets and holes, and you just have to design for it, but it is still possible.
Yeah, for sure. Someone in the questions here sort of picked up on my GDPR theme and just is asking, so GDPR gives individuals the right to basically rescind and right to erase. How does emTRUTH's blockchain support these rights while remaining immutable?
Yeah, so that's always a great question because, blockchain being immutable, we actually we had a huge technical discussion and design around that. The right to be forgotten is basically what this attendee is asking about. And so there's two components to that. One is that people's actual names and stuff like that, and their contact information, that is actually something we don't blockchain. We blockchain it and we link it to an identifiable record that is anonymized, so that we can make that connection, but that connection can be broken. The other thing too is that we have a process, where when data needs to be forgotten, that we make it virtually basically inaccessible by throwing away the key.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. An interesting one that I actually might weigh on as well, but I've had discussion with physicians in the past and do not necessarily agree on the principle that patients should have access to all their records, particularly complex lab work or imaging that may be interpreted by patients, friends, or family members without proper medical training or context. How do you approach those clinicians, and what's the perspective?
Yeah, so that's why we talk about the custodial rights. A lot of patients don't know and don't want to know, how being able to interpret, that the things they want to talk to their doctor is a trusted relationship. And so that's why they grant custodial rights to these clinicians that have a right to update the records and to share them on their behalf for their health decisions, for their health information set. So I think that, puts them in control in terms of whether they believe in that and whether they have still control and access to that. The other thing is that, with the internet and so forth, there's people want to be armchair doctors, and that persists. That's a behavioral problem. That's a behavioral thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing to be informed about your own health. And if you want to be informed and engaged in your discussion, that is your right. And that is, in fact, we encourage that. I think people should be encouraged to understand the conditions that they suffer from and ways to improve it. Does that make them qualified to read a radiology chart? Probably not, right? But that doesn't negate the fact that they should have access to it if they want, right?
Yeah, that's a principle we work on a lot too. I mean, we're working on the design of a feature right now that would, for example, let if the patient shares their health record with a physician, that physician looks at it, but that physician can actually leave a note for future physicians based on sort of what they're doing. That would move with the patient. Yeah. It's an interesting scenario because the physician won't want the patient necessarily to see that note. There needs to be that ability to collaborate on a patient without you seeing what's being said about you. But I think the fundamental thing there is that you should know that data exists and have the right to know who authored it and be able to understand its presence, but not necessarily see its content. I think that's something that blockchain really does enable to with.
And our API supports that, Alec, is that we can control those individual block pieces of data that should be private just between the two physicians, as an example.
Yeah. Just looking into the other questions, I think maybe with the few minutes we have left here, we dove sort of right in on the blockchain concept. And maybe for the technologists in the room, just let's go back super high level and just talk about, so what is fundamentally different about storing data in blockchain versus storing data in a relational database that we all know? Like, yes, we know it's sort of broken up as small bits, but what's that technical difference here of what we're talking about with blockchain? There's a few questions along those lines.
Yeah, so for us again, right, is we talked about the difference, right? That cryptocurrency basically creates a coin that you follow in a series of wallets. That's how they use blockchain. The way that we use blockchain is as an encryption technology. We are blockchaining the actual data because we believe the data is the asset, not the coin. That is a fundamental difference. The fundamental difference with what structured databases is that with our technology in blockchain, at emTRUTH, we can deal with structured and unstructured data because, more than 70% of the data is unstructured, and databases don't deal well with that. And we need to be able to connect those data and use those data pieces also about this information about you, because again, your health record is media rich. By nature it is, and it comes from lots of different places in all shapes and sizes. And so that's what our blockchain technology is able to support. It is not driven by just structured information that lends itself well to a database. And then finally, the fact that it is a distributed environment, so that people can own and control their own data, unlike a traditional data warehouse, where the person that you're sending the data to has full control over that data. You control your own data. You control who gets to see it, what they get to see, without IT intervention.
Yeah. Question around just getting your thoughts and perspective on something problem we talk a lot about at Thrive, and one of our team members is asking, what are your thoughts on data validity? That's right, I pronounced that. Patients are not medical experts. How can we trust validity? That's what I'm trying to say. I'm so sorry.
Oh, validity of the data.
Validity
right.
Of the data.
So garbage in, garbage out, right?
Yeah. So how do we trust that that patients are actually giving us accurate information?
Yeah. So the patients, so first of all, that's why we log everything, right? Who supplied that data? For us, it's a known system. It's not anonymous. If your doctor said these notes, it's from your doctor, and all the weight that carries. If it's from you, it shows that you entered that data, and it's from all the weights that you carried. It's no different than when your doctor asks you, do you smoke? It's up to you to answer that question, but we know that the answer is provided by you. And so we can't police what people's intentions are. But that having been said, we can also, in certain cases, if they want to audit that data, and with the blockchain history and being able to share very, very specific pieces of it, including sharing just the logs in blockchain, you can look to see, the validity of that information set, right? And the weight that you put behind it. Misinformation will exist. And what we want to be able to do is identify with the source of that information, right?
Yeah, I think that's our responsibility as data platform companies, is making sure that we facilitate the transfer of information, but then also accurately identify where it came from, so that the people digesting it can understand the context of that data.
Yeah.
Maybe one last question makes sense to wrap up on is any resources or good resources you'd recommend to people to learn about blockchain in healthcare, and we can certainly collect them from you and we'll link them out afterwards, but anything that sort of jumps to mind from a reading list perspective?
Yeah, the forums like these, I think, are super helpful because you'll get practical things. Certainly when you look at the Google Scholar as an example, there are the peer-reviewed articles that are going on, and those I think are really good sources. There is in fact an IEEE organization that is dedicated to blockchain in healthcare. And I think one of their first projects is to create a survey of research articles that are out there about blockchain in healthcare. So I think those are all, really good resources. The things that are missing, are companies like ours that are at the forefront of innovation. And we don't normally publish our technology, in those, other than the patents that we file. So those are, I think those are good ways if you want to do a deep dive. Certainly there's lots of general pieces of information that are available now, but if you're looking at true deep blockchain learning, and then those things are good places to start. And that IEEE survey that they're working on, it's a work in progress.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll make sure to circulate some of those links. Irene, I just want to say a sincere thank you for giving us your time to talk about this, and to everyone who took time today to join us and to join in the conversation with fantastic questions. I think there's so much work to be done in this area, and so much work to be done to unlock sort of the power of this data in healthcare, and it's fantastic to hear about companies such as yours for working on those.
Likewise, we look for a long-term relationship with Thrive because I think you guys are doing great stuff, and it's been a really good, wonderful questions, by the way. So bravo to everybody on really, really interesting and nuanced questions. I enjoyed this time very much, and I thank you for inviting me to this.
Thanks to Irene and to everyone for joining us today. And again, we're going to be hosting one of these grand round sessions every month. So stay tuned for emails and updates for our next event, and have a great rest of everyone's day.